Welcome, dear viewers. For more exclusive, thrilling stories every week, join our membership. Sit back, relax, and sip your coffee. Enjoy. My name is Jake Bear Grease, and I've been fighting fires in Flathead County for 3 years now. Before Montana, I was just another burned-out EMT in Portland, watching the city eat itself alive, one overdose at a time. When my partner Danny took his own life after we lost that kid on Southeast Powell, 7 years old, same age as my nephew, I knew I had to get out. Montana called to me like my grandmother's stories used to, promising clean air and honest work. I found both at rural Metro Fire Station 12, nestled between Whitefish and Columbia Falls, where the mountains cradle the valley like protective hands. The pay wasn't much, but the crew was solid. Chief Marlowe, a third-generation firefighter whose family helped build the first station. Tommy Kicking Woman, whose great-grandfather was Blackfeet and who could read smoke patterns like ancient prophecies. And Rebecca Red Finnegan, who transferred here from Chicago after something happened that she never talks about. The station itself sits on old ground. Tommy told me the Blackfeet used to avoid this particular stretch of forest, called it where the fire spirits dance. I laughed the first time he said it. Now I keep sage in my locker and sweet grass braided around my radio antenna. The fires we fight at rural Metro don't always burn things that should burn. Last Tuesday, we got called to a house fire on Whitefish Road, and when we arrived, the flames were blue-white and cold as winter mornings, licking at the walls without leaving so much as a scorch mark. The family inside was screaming, but not from heat. They were screaming because the fire was burning their memories instead of their furniture, consuming decades of family photos, first words, birthday wishes, and Christmas mornings until all that was left were empty people standing in empty rooms. When we tried to douse it with water, the flames just laughed, a sound like wind through dry grass, like children playing in a graveyard. Chief Marlowe told us later that some blazes burn deeper than wood and drywall, that Montana has always been a place where the elements do what they want, when they want. Now I know why our turnout gear is lined with symbols that aren't on any fire department manual, why our axes are blessed by priests before every shift, why we never, ever go into certain fires alone. That's when Chief Marlowe sat me down in his office, the one with newspaper clippings dating back to 1952, yellowing on the walls, and handed me a folded piece of paper. "These aren't suggestions, Bear Grease," he said, his weathered hands steady as stone. "They're survival instructions. Follow them, and you might live long enough to retire. Break them." He gestured toward a memorial wall lined with photos of firefighters who died in the line of duty, their eyes seeming to follow me in the dim light. The paper contained 7 protocols that would change everything I thought I knew about fighting fires in this ancient, watching land. The protocols were handwritten in faded blue ink, the kind that comes from old ballpoint pens that leak in your pocket. Chief Marlowe's grandfather had started the list in 1952, and each subsequent chief had added their own observations in different colored inks, a timeline of supernatural encounters written in coffee stains in careful cursive. Protocol 1. Never enter a structure fire alone between 11 p.m. and 4 a.m. The flames get hungry during these hours and will try to separate your team. Protocol 2. If you hear children singing inside a burning building, evacuate immediately. Do not attempt rescue. Real children scream. They don't harmonize. Protocol 3. Should your radio start picking up transmissions from firefighters who died on duty, acknowledge their warnings but do not respond directly. They're trying to help, but speaking to the dead invites them to follow you home. I read the first 3 twice, my coffee growing cold in the ceramic mug Tommy had made in some pottery class years ago. The station kitchen smelled like yesterday's chili, and the industrial soap Red used to clean the trucks. Through the bay doors, I could see the Flathead National Forest stretching toward Glacier Park, the pines dark against the October sky. "These are jokes, right?" I asked Chief Marlowe. He was leaning against the refrigerator, watching me with eyes the color of creek stones. Read the rest first. Protocol 4. If flames burn in colors that don't exist in nature, silver, pure black, or transparent, evacuate all civilians to a minimum distance of 200 yards. These fires consume more than matter. Protocol 5. Any structure fire that produces no smoke requires specialized equipment. Request backup from Station 7 in Kalispell and wait for their arrival. Do not attempt entry with standard gear. Protocol 6. If you encounter fire that burns upward through rain or snow, retreat immediately. Mark the location for the Forest Service Special Unit and maintain a 2-mile perimeter. Protocol 7. Never remove your SCBA mask if you smell roses or vanilla inside a burning structure. These scents mask gases that will make you see things that aren't there, or worse, things that are. I set the paper down, my hand steadier than I expected. 3 years of watching Portland tear itself apart had taught me that the world held more darkness than most people wanted to admit. But this felt different. Older, like stepping into a story my grandmother might have whispered during thunderstorms. "How many of these have you seen?" I asked. "All of them." Chief Marlowe pulled out a chair and sat across from me. Protocol 2 happened my second week on the job. House fire on Meridian Road, the Kowalski family. We heard 3 little voices singing "Ring Around the Rosie" from upstairs, while the parents screamed for help from the front yard. Tommy's father was chief then. He ordered us out. But if there were really kids... The Kowalski children were at their grandmother's house in Billings that night. Had been for a week. He paused, studying my face. We went back the next morning after the fire died out naturally. Found 3 sets of child-sized footprints burned into the hardwood floor of the upstairs hallway. The prints led to a closet that had been sealed up during renovations 30 years earlier. The radio crackled to life, Red's voice cutting through the static. Engine 12, house fire reported at 847 North Meridian Road. Structure fully involved. No occupants confirmed on scene. Chief Marlowe was already moving toward the bay. "Grab your gear, Bear Grease." Time for field testing. I suited up in turnout gear that felt heavier than standard equipment, the jacket lined with what looked like small metal talismans sewn into the fabric. Tommy appeared beside me, his dark eyes serious as he checked my air pack connections. "First rule of fighting fire in the Flathead," he said, pulling my helmet strap tight, "is remembering that not everything that burns belongs to this world. Some fires started burning long before white men came to Montana, and they'll keep burning long after we're gone." The address hit me as we loaded into Engine 12, North Meridian Road, same street where the Kowalski family had lived decades ago. Red drove with the focused intensity of someone who'd seen too much, her red hair pulled back tight under her helmet. The siren wailed as we headed north through downtown Whitefish, past the train depot and the ski resort entrance. October in Montana meant early snow in the mountains, but tonight felt warm for the season, like the air itself was holding its breath. "Radio check." Chief Marlowe's voice came through our headsets as the house came into view. What I saw made my training stumble. The structure was indeed fully involved. Orange flames climbed every surface, reaching toward the star-filled sky. But something was wrong with the light. The fire cast shadows that moved independently of the flames, shadows that seemed to reach toward our truck as we approached. "Copy, Chief," I replied, my EMT training kicking in automatically. No visible occupants from this angle. Red parked the engine, and we began our approach. That's when I heard it, faint but clear over the roar of flames consuming timber and shingles. 3 young voices, sweet and high, singing in perfect harmony. Ashes, ashes, we all fall down. Chief Marlowe's hand landed on my shoulder. "Protocol 2, he said firmly. "Back to the truck, now." But I was already moving, my body responding to the written warnings before my mind fully processed what was happening. Because somewhere in that burning house, children who shouldn't exist were singing a song about death, and their voices sounded hungry. The singing stopped the moment Chief Marlowe ordered us back to the truck. Not gradually, not fading, just gone, like someone had unplugged a radio mid-song. The sudden silence felt heavier than the flames crackling 30 yards away. Red kept the engine running, her hands gripping the steering wheel while we regrouped behind the vehicle. "How long do we wait?" I asked, adjusting my helmet strap. The metal talismans sewn into my jacket clinked together like wind chimes. "Until they get bored and move on," Tommy said, pulling out a leather pouch from his gear bag. He sprinkled what looked like tobacco mixed with dried herbs around the perimeter of our position. My grandmother taught me this. Creates a boundary they won't cross. Chief Marlowe was on the radio with dispatch. "Engine 12 to Central. We have a Protocol 2 situation at 847 North Meridian. Requesting backup from Station 7 and a Forest Service consultation." "Copy that. Engine 12. Station 7 is en route. ETA 12 minutes. Forest Service Special Unit has been notified." I watched the house burn, noting how the flames seemed to dance in patterns that reminded me of the Aurora Borealis. Shifting, swirling, almost choreographed. The structure should have been consumed by now, but the fire maintained its intensity without spreading to neighboring trees or the wooden fence surrounding the property. "Why isn't it spreading?" I asked. "Because it's not really fire," Red said, her Chicago accent cutting through the Montana night. "Not the kind we're trained for anyway. Protocol 4 territory. The flames are burning something other than wood and drywall." She was right. Now that I focused, the colors were wrong. What I'd initially taken for standard orange flames held undertones of deep purple and silver, hues that shouldn't exist in any natural combustion process. A new sound emerged from the house. Footsteps, small and quick, moving across what should have been structurally compromised flooring. The steps traced patterns above our heads. 3 sets of feet running in circles, then skipping, then stopping directly above where we stood behind the engine. "They know we're here," Tommy said quietly, his weather-beaten face grim in the firelight. The footsteps changed direction, heading toward the front of the house. Through the main window, somehow still intact despite the flames, 3 small silhouettes appeared. They pressed their faces against the glass, leaving handprints that steamed but didn't burn away. My stomach dropped. The faces were children, maybe 6 or 7 years old, but their features shifted like smoke. One moment they looked like normal kids, the next their eyes were too large, their smiles too wide, their heads tilted at angles that made my neck ache just watching. "Don't look directly at them," Chief Marlowe warned. "Protocol 7 applies here too. They'll make you see things that aren't real." But I caught something that was real enough. One of the children was wearing a Whitefish Elementary School t-shirt with a grizzly bear mascot, the same shirt my nephew wore to school in Portland. "Jake." Red's hand touched my arm. "You're not breathing right." She was right. My breath had become shallow, rapid, like the air itself was thinning. The scent of roses began to filter through my SCBA mask, sweet, cloying, completely out of place in a house fire. Protocol 7, I said, checking my mosque seal. The smell is getting through somehow. Tommy pulled a different pouch from his gear, this one containing what looked like crushed sage and sweetgrass. He lit it with a storm lighter, letting the smoke drift toward the house. The three figures in the window recoiled as if the smoke were acid. Traditional blessing, he explained. Some things respond to the old ways better than modern equipment. Engine 7 from Kalispell arrived in a roar of diesel and flashing lights. Captain Elena Rodriguez stepped out, followed by 3 firefighters carrying gear I'd never seen before. Silver-lined hoses, axes with symbols carved into the handles, and breathing apparatus that looked like it belonged in a laboratory rather than a fire truck. "Status report," Captain Rodriguez called out, her voice carrying the authority of someone who dealt with this before. "Protocol 2 confirmed with elements of 4 and 7, Chief Marlowe replied. 3 juvenile entities, non-responsive to standard suppression techniques. House has been burning for 47 minutes with no structural collapse." Rodriguez nodded grimly. "We'll take it from here. Standard crew maintains perimeter at 200 yards. I wanted to ask questions, to understand what made Station 7's equipment different, but Tommy was already guiding me back toward Engine 12. "First lesson in fighting supernatural fires," he said, "is knowing when you're out of your depth." As we retreated, I watched Rodriguez's team work. They moved with the confidence of specialists, their silver-lined hoses connecting to what looked like a modified water supply. When they opened the valves, the spray that emerged shimmered like moonlight on water. The moment the silver liquid touched the flames, the house erupted in sound. Not the roar of combustion, but screaming. High-pitched, anguished wails that seemed to come from the fire itself. The 3 children figures in the window pressed harder against the glass, their handprints spreading like spilled ink. Then the window shattered outward, not from heat or pressure, but from something inside trying to escape. Through the broken glass, I saw shapes pouring out. Not smoke, but shadows with substance, moving like living things fleeing from light. They writhed and twisted, reaching toward us before dissipating into the night air. The flames began to recede, pulling back into themselves like a time-lapse video running in reverse. Within minutes, the house stood intact, unmarked by fire damage, looking exactly as it had before the emergency call. "What the hell just happened?" I asked. "Memory fire," Red explained, watching the specialists pack their equipment. "Burns events instead of matter. Someone died in that house years ago. 3 children probably, and their trauma got caught in the walls like smoke and fabric. Tonight something triggered it to replay." Captain Rodriguez approached our group, pulling off her specialized helmet. Her gray hair was pulled back in a practical bun, and her eyes held the tired wisdom of someone who'd seen too much. "Clean suppression," she reported to Chief Marlowe. "The entities have moved on. House is structurally sound, but I'd recommend the owners stay elsewhere for a few weeks while the psychic residue settles." "Psychic residue?" I asked. "Think of it like emotional radiation," she said. "Traumatic events leave imprints, especially involving children. Most of the time, these imprints just create cold spots or strange dreams. But during certain atmospheric conditions, tonight's barometric pressure was perfect. They can manifest as full sensory experiences." Tommy was nodding along like this was basic science. "My grandfather used to say the land remembers everything that happens on it. Happy memories fade, but pain." He gestured toward the house. "Pain burns deep." We loaded back into Engine 12, the night feeling different now, charged with possibilities I'd never considered during my years in Portland. As Red drove us back to the station, I found myself studying the protocols again, understanding now that they weren't just rules, but survival instructions for navigating a world where trauma could take physical form. "How often does this happen?" I asked. "Often enough that we need specialists," Chief Marlowe replied. "Montana's got a lot of history buried in its soil. Native American battles, mining accidents, homesteaders who died alone in winter storms. Sometimes that history decides to remind us it's still here." Back at Station 12, I sat in the kitchen with a fresh cup of coffee, reading the protocols once more. Each rule now carried weight, backed by experience rather than skepticism. Tomorrow I'd be on shift again, ready to fight fires that burned memory instead of wood, equipped with knowledge my ENT training had never covered. Outside, the mountains stood silent under star-filled skies, keeping their ancient secrets while the wind carried whispers of stories yet untold. 2 weeks passed before the next call came in. 2 weeks of normal fires, a kitchen grease flare-up on Central Avenue, a chimney fire at the Kaplan's ranch, a grass fire that turned out to be teenagers burning homework behind the high school. Standard stuff that made me wonder if the memory fire had been some kind of initiation hazing, a shared hallucination brought on by stress and suggestion. Then October turned to November, and the snow arrived early. I was cleaning equipment in the bay when the alarm sounded at 2:17 a.m. Red slid down the pole first, her boots hitting the concrete as she reached for her turnout gear. "Structure fire, 1247 Lakeshore Drive," she called out, reading from the dispatch printout. "Cabin fully involved. Occupant status unknown." Lakeshore Drive hugged the western edge of Whitefish Lake, where wealthy retirees built log mansions with floor-to-ceiling windows facing the water. November meant most of the seasonal residents had returned to Phoenix or San Diego, leaving their properties empty until spring. Chief Marlowe emerged from his office, already dressed, his eyes sharp despite the hour. "Protocol 1 territory," he said, glancing at his watch. "We go in pairs, no exceptions." I partnered with Tommy, who handed me a different helmet than my usual gear. This one felt heavier, with symbols etched into the metal that caught the bay lights strangely. "Blackfeet protection symbols," he explained, adjusting his own equipment. "My great-grandfather carved these during the winter of 1934, after the Brennan mine fire. Some blazes require spiritual armor as much as physical." Engine 12 rolled through downtown Whitefish, past the Runnington Bar, and the train station where freight cars sat loaded with timber, headed for Spokane. Snow had been falling for 3 hours, coating Highway 93 in a thin layer that made the road treacherous. Red drove carefully, the chains on our tires biting into ice. Lakeshore Drive curved along the water's edge, lined with driveways that disappeared into stands of lodgepole pine and Douglas fir. The address took us to a sprawling log home set back from the road, its windows glowing orange against the snowy darkness. But something was wrong with the scene. Snow fell steadily around us, yet above the burning cabin, the precipitation turned to steam before it could reach the flames. The fire burned upward in a perfect column, reaching toward the low-hanging clouds like a signal beacon. "Protocol 6, Chief Marlowe announced over the radio. "Fire burning through weather. Maintain 2-mile perimeter and contact Forest Service Special Unit immediately." 2 miles? I asked Tommy as we parked the engine well back from the structure. "That seems excessive." "Protocol 6 fires don't follow physics," he replied, pulling out his tobacco pouch again. "They can jump distances that shouldn't be possible, spread through snow and rain, even travel underground through root systems. The last one was in 1987, near Hungry Horse Dam. Burned a straight line through 3 feet of snow for 14 miles before it finally died out." Red was on the radio with dispatch, requesting the Forest Service team, when my headset crackled with static. Through the white noise, a voice emerged, faint but clear. "Engine 12, this is Captain Walsh. Do not approach the structure. Repeat, Do not approach. I looked around our group. Chief Marlowe was talking to Red about evacuation procedures. Tommy was spreading his protective herbs in a circle around our position. None of them seemed to have heard the transmission. Did anyone copy that radio call? I asked. They all looked at me with expressions I was learning to recognize. The careful attention people give when something supernatural is happening. What did you hear, Jake? Chief Marlowe asked gently. Captain Walsh, telling us not to approach. Clear as your voice right now. Tommy and Red exchanged glances. Chief Marlowe set down his radio and walked closer. Captain Michael Walsh died in 1979, he said. House fire on Kalispell Avenue. Went back into a burning structure to save a family's dog and got caught when the roof collapsed. The radio crackled again. Engine 12, Jake. Listen carefully. The fire you're looking at started in 1952. It's been burning the same cabin every November 7th for 70 years. The structure rebuilds itself each spring, and each fall it burns again. Protocol 3, I said, remembering the written instructions. Acknowledge but don't respond directly. Chief Marlowe nodded approvingly. What else is he telling you? Captain Walsh's voice continued through my headset. The cabin's owner was named Douglas Mackenzie. He murdered his wife and 3 children on November 7th, 1952, then set the house on fire to cover the evidence. But guilt burns differently than wood, son. It burns forever. I relayed the information to my team. Red was taking notes in a waterproof notebook, documenting everything for the official report that would never be filed with normal channels. Mackenzie's family. Walsh's voice continued. They're still in there, still trying to escape. Every year the fire gives them hope they might make it out this time. Every year they realize they're already dead. The flames above the cabin began to pulse, brightening and dimming in a rhythm that reminded me of a heartbeat. Through the windows, I could see shadows moving, not the chaotic dance of flames, but deliberate, purposeful motion. A woman carrying something in her arms, children running toward a door that would never open for them. Forest Service Special Unit, ETA 45 minutes, Red reported, closing her radio. They're coming from the Zula. Too long, Tommy said, watching the fire pulse faster. Look at the pattern change. He was right. The flames had shifted from their steady upward column to something more aggressive, reaching outward like grasping fingers. The snow around the cabin was melting in a widening circle, creating a ring of bare ground that expanded toward our position. It's trying to spread, Chief Marlowe observed. Jake, what's Captain Walsh saying now? I listened to my headset, where static had replaced Walsh's voice. Then, cutting through the white noise, came something else. A woman's voice, desperate and pleading. Help us, please. We can't find the door. The smoke is too thick, and the children are scared. That's not Captain Walsh, I said. Protocol 3 specifically mentions dead firefighters, Red pointed out. It doesn't cover civilian spirits. Chief Marlowe was quiet for a moment, studying the pulsing flames. New situation. Jake, can you still hear her? The woman's voice came through clearly. We've been trying to get out for so long. Every year, we think this time will be different. Please, if you can hear me, help us find the way. Something in her tone reminded me of my sister calling from Portland, asking if I was eating enough, if I was taking care of myself. The same protective worry, the same love wrapped in urgency. She sounds real, I said. That's the problem, Tommy replied, scattering more herbs as the melted ground crept closer. Real enough to make you want to break Protocol 1. Real enough to make you think you can save them. The flames pulsed brighter. and suddenly I could see them clearly through the windows. A woman with dark hair holding 2 young children, a boy maybe 10 years old standing behind them. They pressed against the glass, their mouths moving in silent pleas for help. "They look so alive," I said. "Because part of them is," Chief Marlowe explained. "Trauma that intense doesn't just leave psychic residue. It creates loops, pocket dimensions where the worst moments replay endlessly. Those people have been dying the same death for 70 years, hoping each time will be different." "So we just watch?" I asked. "We just let them burn?" "We wait for the special unit," he said firmly, "because going in there doesn't save them. It just adds you to the loop. Next November 7th, there'd be 5 people burning instead of 4. The radio crackled. "Jake." Captain Walsh was back, his voice urgent now. "Don't listen to them. I made that mistake in '79. Thought I could save one more life. The fire took me instead, and now I spend every November trying to warn others not to make my choice." I looked at my teammates, Red documenting everything, Tommy maintaining our protective perimeter, Chief Marlowe watching me with the patience of someone who'd guided other rookies through this realization. "How do we help them?" I asked. "We don't," Tommy said gently. "Some pain is too deep to heal. All we can do is honor it, respect it, and make sure it doesn't spread to the living." The woman in the window was crying now, holding her children closer. The boy pressed his palm against the glass, and for a moment, I could swear I felt his desperation through my radio, through the symbols on my helmet, through the sacred smoke Tommy had scattered around us. Then the Forest Service vehicles arrived, their specialized equipment humming to life, and the real work of containment began. December brought the kind of cold that makes your teeth ache and turns breath to crystals before it leaves your mouth. I've been on the night shift for 6 weeks now, long enough to recognize the difference between normal calls and the ones that made Chief Marlowe's jaw tighten when dispatch came through. Tonight was definitely the latter. "Commercial structure fire, Big Mountain Ski Resort," Red announced, hanging up the station phone. "Lodge maintenance building, full involvement, reported." I was halfway into my turnout gear when Chief Marlowe caught my arm. "Jake, this one's different. Big Mountain's been closed since 1999, but the maintenance building keeps burning every few years. Same building, same time of night, always in December." "Protocol 6 again?" I asked, remembering the Mackenzie cabin. "Worse. Protocol 5 inches." He handed me a different breathing apparatus, one I'd seen Station 7 use but never worn myself. "No smoke. Ever. Building burns bright as daylight but produces 0 smoke. Your standard SCBA won't help you in there." Tommy appeared beside us, loading gear I didn't recognize. Silver-lined rope, axes with copper inlays, and bottles of what looked like ordinary water but caught the fluorescent lights strangely. "Blessed Lake McDonald water," he explained, noting my stare. "Glacier Park's got spiritual significance going back thousands of years. Sometimes old medicine works better than new science." The drive to Big Mountain took us up Highway 93 toward the Canadian border, then west on Big Mountain Road through stands of snow-heavy pines. The abandoned ski resort sat like a ghost town against the mountainside, chairlifts frozen in place, lodge windows dark except for the orange glow coming from behind the main buildings. Red parked Engine 12 at the base of the access road. "Station 7's already here," she noted, pointing to the specialized trucks positioned around the maintenance building. Captain Rodriguez met us at the perimeter, her breath steaming in the sub-zero air. "Situations evolved since we arrived. The fire's burning, but it's not consuming the structure. Building keeps regenerating as fast as it burns." I studied the scene through binoculars. She was right. The maintenance building was fully engulfed in bright orange flames, but the walls remained intact. As I watched, a section of roof burned away completely, then rebuilt itself from flame and shadow, only to burn again moments later. "What's inside?" I asked. "That's the problem," Rodriguez replied. "We don't know. Building's been locked up since the resort closed, but thermal imaging shows heat signatures moving around in there. Human-shaped, but the movement patterns are all wrong." Chief Marlowe was studying topographical maps with Station 7 specialists. "What happened here originally?" "Avalanche, February 1987, Rodriguez said. "Buried the maintenance crew during a night shift. 5 men working on grooming equipment when the mountainside came down. They were digging tunnels to get equipment in and out of the building when it happened. Tommy was already spreading protective herbs around our position, but he paused at Rodriguez's words. Digging tunnels? Into the mountain itself. The resort was expanding, adding underground storage for equipment and supplies. The crew was working on connecting the building to the main tunnel system when the avalanche hit. A new sound reached us from the burning building. Not the roar of flames, but the rhythmic clang of metal on metal. Tool on stone. The sound of men digging. "They're still working," I said, understanding hitting me like ice water. "They don't know they're dead. Protocol 5 fires burn more than memory," Chief Marlowe explained. "They burn purpose, duty, obsession. Those men were so focused on their work that death couldn't stop them. They've been digging for 35 years. Through my specialized headset, static began to resolve into voices. "Jimmy, pass me that pickaxe." "Tunnel's looking good, boys. Should break through to the main storage area by morning. Boss is going to be real pleased when he sees this progress." The voices were cheerful, proud of their work. There was no panic, no awareness of the avalanche that had killed them decades ago. "Jake," Chief Marlowe's voice carried a warning tone. "Remember Protocol 3. You can hear them because you're meant to. They're trying to recruit help." "Acknowledge but don't respond," I said, reciting the rule. But the voices continued. "Hey, we could use another set of hands down here. Good honest work and the pay's fair. Just need someone who ain't afraid of a little underground digging." The building pulsed brighter, and I could see shapes moving through the flames. 5 men in work clothes carrying tools, gesturing for me to join them. One waved a helmet, pointing toward what looked like a tunnel entrance that appeared and disappeared in the shifting fire. "Jake." Red's hand touched my shoulder. "You're moving toward the building." I looked down, startled to find my feet had carried me 20 yards closer to the structure. The specialized breathing apparatus felt heavy on my back, and I realized I'd been unconsciously checking its connections. "They're persuasive," Rodriguez observed. "That's why Protocol 5 requires backup from Station 7. Standard crews don't have the training to resist the compulsion." "What kind of training?" I asked, stepping back to the perimeter. "Recognizing that some work is never meant to be finished," she replied. "Those men were good at their jobs, proud of their craftsmanship. Death turned that pride into an eternal need to complete their task. They'll keep digging until someone helps them understand there's nothing left to dig for." Tommy approached with a bundle of burning sweetgrass. "Traditional way to guide lost spirits," he said. "Sometimes the old methods work better than modern psychology." The sweet smoke drifted toward the building, and the digging sounds faltered. For a moment, the flames dimmed, and I could see the 5 workers more clearly. They looked confused, like men waking from deep sleep. "What year is it?" one of them called out. 2022, Rodriguez answered through a megaphone equipped with spiritual amplifiers. "But we just started this job yesterday," another voice protested. "The tunnel's almost finished." "The job was finished 35 years ago," Chief Marlowe said gently. "The avalanche came down in February 1987. You boys completed more work than anyone expected." Silence stretched across the mountainside, broken only by wind through the pines and the hiss of supernatural flames. Then, slowly, the building began to change. The regenerating walls stopped rebuilding themselves. The bright flames started to dim. "We're done then?" The question came from the youngest sounding voice, hopeful and tired. "You're done," Tommy confirmed, raising the burning sweetgrass higher. "Good work, all of you. Time to rest." The flames guttered out like candles in a breeze. Where the maintenance building had stood, only foundation stones remained, half buried in 35 years of snow and forest debris. The tunnel entrance was gone, filled in by decades of natural settling. "Clean resolution," Rodriguez reported into her radio. "Spirits have moved on. Psych is clear." As we packed up equipment, I found myself thinking about the pride in those workers' voices, their satisfaction in a job well done. Even death hadn't been able to take that away from them. "How do you know when someone's really gone?" I asked Tommy as we loaded gear back into Engine 12. "You feel it," he said simply. "The air changes. The pressure lifts. It's like..." He paused, searching for words. "Like holding your breath for 35 years and finally being able to exhale." Driving back down Big Mountain Road, Red was quiet behind the wheel. In the passenger seat, Chief Marlowe updated paperwork that would be filed in cabinets most people never saw. 5 more protocols to learn," he said without looking up from his clipboard. "But you're getting the hang of this, Bear Grease. Understanding that our job isn't always about putting out fires. Sometimes it's about helping them burn clean," I replied, watching the abandoned ski resort disappear in our mirrors. "Exactly," Chief Marlowe said. "Sometimes it's about letting people finish what they started, even if they started it in another life. January brought the kind of cold that kills." The thermometer outside Station 12 hadn't climbed above -15 in 2 weeks, and the Flathead River had frozen solid enough for ice fishing. I'd been having dreams about fires that burned backward through time, flames that consumed tomorrow to fuel today. But I'd learned not to mention my dreams to the crew. In this job, dreams had a way of becoming predictions. The call came at 3:47 a.m. on January 19th, a date I'll remember until I die, assuming I live long enough to forget everything else. "Multiple structure fire, Ravens Hollow subdivision," dispatch crackled through the station speakers. 7 houses involved, expanding pattern, unknown origin. Ravens Hollow was new construction, built where old-growth forest had stood for centuries before developers cleared it 5 years ago. The houses were expensive, modern, filled with families who'd moved to Montana for the mountain views and clean air. Chief Marlowe was already moving before the announcement finished. "Full protocol alert," he called out, grabbing gear I'd never seen him use. A helmet marked with symbols that hurt to look at directly, and a radio that hummed with frequency I could feel in my teeth. "All 7? Red asked, suiting up in specialized equipment. "All 7, plus whatever we encounter that isn't covered," he replied grimly. "Tommy, call your grandmother. Tell her we need a blessing for protection against things that should never have been disturbed." I'd never heard Chief Marlowe mention things that should never have been disturbed. The protocols covered supernatural fires, but this sounded like something else entirely. Tommy was already on his phone, speaking rapid Blackfeet to someone who answered on the first ring despite the hour. His face grew pale as he listened. "She says the ground where those houses are built used to be sacred," he reported. burial ground for warriors who died protecting the valley from something that came down from Canada in 1847. Something that wasn't human. Red started engine 12, but instead of heading directly to Raven's Hollow, she drove to a supply depot I'd never seen. A concrete building hidden behind the Forest Service station. Chief Marlowe emerged minutes later, carrying equipment that looked like it belonged in the medieval armory. Axes with handles carved from what looked like bone, silver-lined hoses, and breathing apparatus that glowed faintly in the darkness. "Jake," he said, handing me a different helmet. "This one's lined with iron from the original Blackfeet weapons used to fight the thing in 1847. Tommy's great-great-grandfather forged it himself." The helmet felt alive against my skull, warm despite the freezing air, vibrating with energy that made my vision sharper. Through the enhanced clarity, I could see details I'd missed before. Symbols carved into telephone poles, protective wards hidden in the architecture of downtown Whitefish, a network of spiritual defenses built into the landscape itself. "What exactly are we fighting?" I asked. "Something that feeds on fire," Chief Marlowe replied. "Something that uses flames to digest human life force. The warriors buried in Raven's Hollow died keeping it contained. Building houses on top of their graves was like removing the lid from a pressure cooker. Raven's Hollow sat on a rise overlooking Whitefish Lake, accessible by a single winding road lined with young aspen trees. As we approached, the scope of the situation became clear. 7 houses were burning, but the fires connected to each other through streams of flame that flowed across the ground like liquid. The blazes formed a pattern, a rough circle with one house at the center, burning brighter than the others. "Protocol 4 and 6 combined," I observed, noting the silver and black flames that reached upward despite falling snow. "Plus something new," Red added, pointing to the central house. "Look at the smoke." She was right. While the surrounding houses produced no smoke at all, triggering Protocol 5, the center structure was generating thick, oily smoke that moved against the wind, flowing toward the other houses like it was alive. Chief Marlowe set up the perimeter at 1/2 mile, farther than any protocol demanded. "Tommy, start the protective circle. Red, contact Station 7 and tell them to bring everything they have. Jake, listen to your radio, but don't acknowledge anything you hear, unless I tell you to." My enhanced headset immediately filled with voices, not just Captain Walsh this time, but dozens of different firefighters, all talking over each other. "Don't let it spread to the trees. The smoke is moving on its own. Something's in the flames, something big. It's not fire. It's feeding. Get out of there. It sees you." Through the chaos of dead voices, one transmission came through clearly. "Engine 12, this is Captain Sarah Running Bear. Died 1847. The thing you're facing isn't bound by your protocols. It's older than your rules, hungrier than your fires. It's been sleeping under those graves for 175 years, and now it's awake." "Jake," Chief Marlowe said urgently, "what did you hear?" I relayed Captain Running Bear's message. Tommy stopped spreading his protective herbs and looked up sharply. "Running Bear was my ancestor," he said. "She led the war party that originally contained this thing. If she's breaking through, the spiritual barriers are failing." Station 7 arrived with reinforcements. 3 trucks carrying equipment I couldn't identify, and crews wearing armor instead of standard turnout gear. Captain Rodriguez coordinated with Chief Marlowe, while her specialists set up devices that hummed with power and projected beams of light toward the burning houses. "Thermal reading is off the charts," one specialist reported. "Core temperature in the center house is over 3,000 degrees, but the structure isn't melting. Something's converting the heat into biological energy. Through my enhanced vision, I could see what the instruments were detecting. The center house wasn't just burning, it was breathing. The walls expanded and contracted rhythmically, and the foundation had sprouted root-like extensions that connected to the other burning structures. It's turning the houses into organs, I realized. A digestive system. Fed by the families inside, Chief Marlowe confirmed grimly. 7 houses, 5 people average per house. 35 lives to fuel its awakening. Captain Running Bear's voice crackled through my headset again. Tommy Kicking Woman, great-great-grandson of my war chief. The old weapons are in the sacred cave above Whitefish Lake. You know the place, where your grandmother took you for your vision quest. The iron arrows blessed with warrior blood. They're the only things that can pierce its heart. Tommy was already moving toward his truck. I know where she means. 20 minutes round trip. We don't have 20 minutes, Rodriguez said, pointing to the expanding fire pattern. It's growing faster now, and there's a housing development half a mile south. The radio crackled with new voices. Not dead firefighters this time, but something else. Multiple voices speaking in unison, harmonizing in ways human vocal cords couldn't achieve. So hungry, so long, warm life, sweet fear, feed us, feed us, feed us. My helmet's iron lining grew hot against my skull, and I could taste copper in my mouth. Through the enhanced vision, I saw the truth of what we were facing. The thing in the center house had form now, a mass of condensed flame and shadow that filled the structure like smoke fills a bottle. But as I watched, parts of it began seeping through windows and gaps in the foundation, flowing toward the other houses where families were trapped. The smoke trails, I said. They're not smoke. They're parts of it, extending to harvest the people in the other houses. Chief Marlowe's radio buzzed with an emergency frequency. All units, evacuate to 2-mile perimeter immediately. Repeat, evacuate to 2 miles. Forest Service Special Containment Unit inbound with tactical deployment. What's tactical deployment? I asked. Controlled burn, Rodriguez replied, her face grim. They're going to saturate the entire area with chemical suppressants, then burn out everything within a 3-mile radius. Complete sterilization. But the families are already gone, she said quietly. Thermal imaging shows no life signs in any of the structures. Whatever this thing is, it consumed them first, then used their life energy to break free from the burial ground. My headset erupted with new transmissions, the voices of the families who'd lived in those houses, calling out for help, pleading for rescue. But Captain Running Bear's voice cut through the chaos. Don't listen to their voices, young fire warrior. What you hear are echoes, memories the creature stole before it fed. The real families are at peace now. Don't let guilt make you break protocol. The specialized containment vehicles arrived like something from a military operation. Armored trucks with chemical spraying equipment and crews in hazmat suits that looked more like space armor than firefighting gear. They worked with efficiency born from experience, establishing a perimeter and beginning their systematic suppression. Tommy returned from his mission to the sacred cave, carrying a bundle wrapped in traditional cloth. Inside were arrows carved from iron and blessed wood, their tips blackened with substances I didn't want to identify. One shot, he said, loading the arrow into a bow that looked ancient but felt solid as modern steel. My ancestors said to aim for the center of its hunger, the place where all the smoke trails meet. The containment team finished their preparations and began the controlled burn. Chemical suppressants rained down like snow, coating everything in white foam that sizzled against the supernatural flames. But instead of extinguishing the fire, the chemicals seemed to anger it, The creature rose from the center house like a pillar of living flame, reaching toward the sky with appendages that might have been arms or tentacles or something else entirely. Its voice shook the ground. "You cannot starve us again. We will feed. We will spread. We will consume every warm life in this valley." Tommy drew the sacred arrow, his hand steady as mountain stone. "For the warriors who held you before," he said quietly, and released. The arrow flew true, piercing the creature's core with a sound like thunder rolling backward. For a moment, everything stopped. The flames froze mid-dance, the smoke hung motionless in the air, even the wind held its breath. Then the creature screamed, a sound that shattered windows in our trucks 2 miles away, and collapsed inward like a star dying in reverse. The connected houses crumbled to ash, leaving only 7 empty foundations and the bitter smell of something ancient finally learning how to die. The silence after the creature's death felt heavier than its screaming. Where Raven's Hollow had stood, only blackened foundations remained, arranged in a perfect circle around a crater that went deeper than any basement should. The Forest Service containment team was packing specialized equipment while their cleanup crew spread lime over the scorched earth. I sat in Engine 12's passenger seat, my hands shaking as adrenaline drained from my system. The iron-lined helmet lay in my lap, no longer warm against my palm. The enhanced vision had faded, leaving me feeling half blind after seeing the world through spiritual clarity. "First time witnessing something that old die," Chief Marlowe said, settling into the driver's seat. "Takes a piece out of you, watching something that ancient finally find peace." "It didn't look peaceful," I replied, remembering the creature's final scream. "It looked angry." "Anger's just fear wearing different clothes," Tommy said from behind us. He was rewrapping the sacred arrow in its traditional cloth, the iron tip now clean of whatever dark substances had stained it. That thing had been hungry and trapped for 175 years. Fear of starving again, fear of being buried again. Death probably felt like relief. Red started the engine, but instead of heading back to Station 12, she drove toward downtown Whitefish. "Post-incident protocol," she explained, noting my confusion. "After major supernatural encounters, we debrief at neutral ground, somewhere the spirits can't follow." She parked outside the Great Northern Bar on Central Avenue, a place I'd driven past dozens of times but never entered. The neon sign flickered against the pre-dawn darkness, casting red light on fresh snow. Inside, the bar was closed to regular customers, but somehow still open, manned by a bartender who looked like he'd been expecting us. "Evening, Frank," Chief Marlowe said, settling onto a bar stool worn smooth by decades of use. "Evening, Chief." Frank was maybe 70, with silver hair and eyes that suggested he'd seen things that never made it into newspaper reports. "Heard you boys had some excitement out at Raven's Hollow." "Word travels fast," Red observed. "In a valley this size, supernatural incidents are community business," Frank replied, pouring 4 cups of coffee that smelled like it had been brewing since midnight. "Plus the old families keep track. We've got a responsibility to know when the ancient things wake up." Tommy accepted his coffee gratefully. "Your grandfather was at the original containment in 1847. Great-grandfather. Heinrich Zimmermann came over from Bavaria with knowledge of old country hunting techniques, worked alongside your people to forge the iron weapons and establish the burial protocols." Frank gestured toward faded photographs on the wall, pictures of men in frontier clothing standing around what looked like a ceremonial circle. "Family tradition says that creature came down from the Canadian Rockies, following mining camps and feeding on prospectors until it reached the Flathead Valley. What happened to the families in those houses? I asked, the question that had been eating at me since we left the scene. Consumed completely, Chief Marlowe replied quietly. Not just killed, absorbed. Their life force, memories, even their spiritual essence. That's why the creature could use their voices on the radio. For a few hours, it literally contained everything those people had been. But they're at peace now, Tommy added. When we destroyed the creature, we freed what it had stolen. The thermal readings went cold because those souls finally moved on to where they belonged. Frank refilled our cups without being asked. In the old days, events like tonight would call for a 3-day ceremony to cleanse the land and honor the dead. Modern times don't allow for such things, but the need remains. Through the bar's front window, I could see the eastern mountains beginning to catch the first hints of dawn. My shift had started 9 hours ago, but it felt like I'd lived through several lifetimes. How often do things like this happen? I asked. Ancient entities breaking containment? Maybe once every 20 years, Chief Marlowe said. But supernatural fires in general? 2 or 3 times a month during active season. The protocols exist because this valley has always attracted things that don't belong in the normal world. Why here? I asked. What makes Montana special? Tommy and Frank exchanged glances, the kind of look that passes between people who share old knowledge. Thin places, Tommy said finally. My grandmother calls them spots where the membrane between worlds wears thin. Mountains, deep forests, places where indigenous peoples held ceremony for thousands of years. The spiritual energy builds up over time, creates opportunities for things from elsewhere to find their way through. The Blackfeet have stories going back to the beginning, Frank added. Stories about creatures that came from the direction of the Aurora Borealis, following the magnetic lines that run through these mountains. Most of them were contained or destroyed long before white settlers arrived, but some went dormant, waiting. Waiting for what? I asked. Disturbance, Chief Marlowe replied. Development, mining, anything that disrupts the old protections. Raven's Hollow was built directly on top of a sacred burial ground, without consultation with tribal elders. The developers thought they were just moving some old graves to a proper cemetery. They moved the graves, but not the containment circles, Tommy said bitterly. Concrete foundations broke the spiritual barriers that held that thing down. It's been feeding slowly for 5 years, growing stronger with every family that moved into those houses. My radio crackled softly, and Captain Walsh's voice came through. Jake, you did good work tonight. But understand, what you faced was contained, controlled by ancient protections. There are things sleeping in these mountains that make tonight's creature look like a candle compared to a forest fire. I looked around the table. Did you all hear that? They nodded grimly. Protocol 3 doesn't just apply to individual calls, Red explained. Dead firefighters stay connected to active crews, sharing warnings about larger threats. Captain Walsh has been monitoring supernatural activity in the Flathead Valley since 1979. What kind of larger threats? I asked. Frank stood up and walked to an old map on the wall, a topographical survey of northwestern Montana from the 1890s. Red pins marked locations scattered throughout the mountain ranges. Each pin represents a known dormant entity, he said. Things that came down from Canada or up from Yellowstone, following spiritual energy lines. Most are contained by natural barriers, deep lakes, high peaks, underground cave systems. But climate change is altering the landscape, melting permafrost, changing water levels. How many pins? I asked. studying the map. 47 that we know of, Chief Marlowe replied, and those are just the ones documented since white settlement. Tommy's people have oral histories going back centuries, describing creatures that might still be out there. My coffee cup rattled against the saucer as exhaustion finally hit me. The enhanced perception from the ion helmet had burned through my energy reserves, leaving me feeling like I'd run a marathon while solving calculus problems. "Go home. Get some sleep," Chief Marlowe said, noting my condition. "But Jake, what happened tonight changes things. You've been baptized by fire, literally. The spiritual world knows you now, recognizes you as someone who can see and interact with entities beyond normal human perception." "What does that mean?" "It means you'll start having dreams," Tommy said. "Visions sometimes. Warnings about future incidents, or echoes from past ones. Don't fight them. They're your mind learning to process information your enhanced senses are picking up. And it means you're ready for advanced training," Chief Marlowe added. "Station 7 runs specialized courses for firefighters who've encountered major supernatural events. 2 weeks in Missoula, learning techniques that aren't in any textbook." Red drove me back to Station 12 to collect my truck, the pre-dawn world looking strangely normal after the night's events. The mountains stood silent against the lightening sky, but I could feel them watching now, aware of me in ways they hadn't been before. "One more thing," Red said as I got out of the engine. "What happened tonight? The creature, the ancient burial ground, all of it. That's going to be in the newspapers as a gas leak explosion. 7 houses, tragic accident, investigation ongoing. The families will be listed as missing, presumed dead in the blast." "Cover-up?" I asked. "Protection," she corrected. "Can you imagine what would happen if the general public knew there were 47 dormant supernatural entities scattered through the Montana wilderness? The panic alone would destabilize the entire region." I drove home through empty streets, past houses where normal people slept peacefully, unaware that their safety depended on a small group of firefighters armed with blessed weapons and rules written in coffee-stained notebooks. In my apartment, I fell asleep on the couch, still wearing my turnout gear, too tired to undress. And for the first time since joining rural Metro Fire, I dreamed not of flames that burned backward through time, but of something much larger stirring in the deep places beneath Glacier National Park. Something that had been sleeping since the last ice age and was beginning to sense the warmth of a changing world above. The dreams started 3 days after Raven's Hollow. Not the backward burning fires I'd grown accustomed to, but something deeper. Visions of ice cracking in patterns that looked like massive fingerprints, of something ancient stretching beneath Glacier National Park after millennia of frozen sleep. Each night, the dreams grew more urgent, until I woke on February 14th, knowing with absolute certainty that something catastrophic was about to happen. The call came at 11:23 p.m. "All units, emergency response to Glacier National Park, Avalanche Creek sector," dispatch announced. "Multiple structure fires reported, unknown origin. Park Service requesting immediate supernatural protocol response." Chief Marlowe was already suiting up in the full ceremonial gear. The armor-like turnout coat lined with protective symbols, the helmet that hummed with spiritual energy, the radio that connected him to frequencies beyond normal spectrum. His face held the grim expression of someone who'd been expecting this call for years. "The big one?" I asked, grabbing my own enhanced equipment. "The big one," he confirmed. "Tommy, call your grandmother. Tell her it's time for the awakening protocol." Tommy's face went pale. "Chief, the awakening protocol hasn't been used since 1910. My great-grandfather said it required a blood sacrifice from 7 warriors, and even then barely worked." "Things change," Chief Marlowe replied. We have advantages they didn't. Modern communication, better weapons, and Jake. Me? I asked, pulling on the iron-lined helmet that had become as familiar as my own skin. You've been touched by ancient fire and lived, he explained. That marks you as someone who can channel spiritual energy without being consumed by it. Tonight, that might be the difference between containment and catastrophe. Station 7 was already mobilizing when we arrived at the Glacier Park entrance. Captain Rodriguez coordinated with park rangers while her specialists unloaded equipment I'd never seen. Devices that looked like a cross between radar and church organs. Weapons forged from materials that hurt to look at directly. "Situation report," Chief Marlowe called out. "Thermal bloom started 2 hours ago," Rodriguez replied, pointing toward the mountains. "Something big is melting permafrost from underneath, creating steam vents and sinkholes throughout the Avalanche Creek drainage. Every cabin, ranger station, and visitor center in a 15-mile radius spontaneously combusted at the same time. Through my enhanced vision, I could see what normal eyes missed. Columns of superheated air rising from dozens of points throughout the park, creating a pattern that looked disturbingly familiar. The same circular arrangement we'd seen at Raven's Hollow, but magnified 1,000-fold. It's feeding again, I realized, using the buildings and anyone inside them to fuel its awakening. "Correct," Tommy said, consulting maps marked with his grandmother's annotations. "But this isn't the same kind of creature we faced before. This is one of the original ones, entities that came to Earth during the last ice age and went dormant when the glaciers retreated." My radio crackled with familiar voices, Captain Walsh, Captain Running Bear, and others I'd come to recognize from previous encounters. But tonight, they sounded different, urgent in ways I'd never heard before. "Jake," Captain Walsh's voice cut through the static. "What you're facing tonight has been sleeping under 10,000 years of ice. It's not bound by the protocols because it predates everything human civilization has learned about fire and containment." "Then how do we stop it?" I asked. Captain Running Bear's voice joined the transmission. "You don't stop it, young warrior. You guide it back to sleep. But the cost." Her voice faded, replaced by the sound of wind through ancient forests. Chief Marlowe was coordinating with Forest Service special units arriving from 3 states. Heavy equipment, specialized chemicals, and crews trained in supernatural containment that made our rural operation look like volunteers with garden hoses. "Evacuation radius is now 50 miles, he announced. "Every town from Whitefish to the Canadian border. This thing's thermal output could melt Lake McDonald and flood the entire Flathead Valley." Through the enhanced radio frequencies, I could hear the creature's consciousness stirring. Not the angry hunger of the Raven's Hollow entity, but something vast and patient, awakening slowly after dreaming through centuries of winter. Its thoughts felt like geological time, like continental drift made conscious. "It's not malevolent," I said, the realization hitting me like revelation. "It's just enormous and confused, like waking up in a world that's completely changed." Tommy nodded, understanding immediately. "The land it remembers is gone. The Ice Age forests, the megafauna it used to feed on. Everything's different now. Which makes it dangerous," Rodriguez added. "A confused entity with that much power could reshape the landscape trying to recreate its preferred environment." The thermal blooms were expanding, creating a feedback loop that melted more permafrost and released more ancient organic matter for the creature to consume. Through my helmet's spiritual sensors, I could track its awakening. Consciousness spreading through underground root systems and geological formations, reaching toward the surface like fingers made of living stone. "Traditional containment won't work," Chief Marlowe said, studying readouts from equipment that measured spiritual energy instead of temperature. But guidance might. Jake, your connection to ancient fire, can you communicate with it? I can try, I said, though the idea of making psychic contact with something that large felt like trying to have a conversation with a mountain range. Tommy handed me a bundle of materials from his truck, traditional herbs, stones carved with symbols that predated written language, and a piece of what looked like fossilized wood. These are from the original ceremonies my people used to speak with the old ones. Light them together, breathe the smoke, and let your enhanced perception expand. I followed his instructions, lighting the materials in a metal bowl while the chaos of evacuation continued around us. The smoke that rose was silver white, carrying scents that reminded me of winter mornings in deep forest silence. My consciousness expanded outward, riding the smoke toward the awakening presence beneath the mountains. Contact came like touching the surface of a vast, slow-moving ocean. Thoughts measured in decades, memories spanning ice ages, awareness that encompassed entire ecosystems. Sleep was good, the entity communicated, its thoughts feeling like the weight of glaciers. But the warmth above calls and the dreams of hunting are strong. The world has changed, I projected back, trying to match its temporal scale. The prey you remember is gone. The ice you knew has retreated. If you rise now, you'll find only emptiness and confusion. Show me, it responded. Through our connection, I shared human memories. Cities built where forests once stood. Roads cutting through ancient migration routes. The gradual warming that had melted the permafrost, protecting its slumber. The entity absorbed these images, processing them with intelligence that had observed the rise and fall of previous civilizations. Not my time, it concluded, sadness flowing through the connection like melting snow. The world above belongs to small, quick things now. But sleep grows difficult when the earth grows warm. We can help, I offered. Create new barriers, deeper cold, places where you can dream undisturbed until the world turns again. The Forest Service special units had positioned their equipment in a precise pattern around the thermal bloom sites. Chief Marlowe's voice came through my regular radio. Jake, we need to know, is it willing to return to dormancy? Yes, I replied, maintaining the psychic connection. But it needs guarantees. Assurance that future warning won't wake it again. What would you offer, small firebearer? Through the connection, I felt the creature's core need, not destruction, but security. Certainty that its sleep wouldn't be disturbed by changes beyond its control. Deeper chambers, I projected. Below the permafrost line, in stone that stays cold regardless of surface temperature. And watchers, people who monitor your dreams and maintain the barriers. Your people would do this? Guard the sleep of something they fear? Some of us understand that not all powerful things are evil, I replied, thinking of Tommy's grandmother, Chief Marlowe's dedication, the generations of firefighters who'd learned to work with supernatural forces rather than simply fighting them. The entity considered this, its thoughts moving like slow rivers through ancient canyons. Finally, show me where. Working through our connection, I guided the creature's consciousness toward the deepest parts of Glacier National Park, cavern systems that descended far below the influence of surface warming, chambers carved by water that had been flowing since before humans walked the continent. Yes, it agreed. This will serve. But the transition requires assistance, your fire-touched awareness, to guide the transfer. The process felt like steering the dream the size of a mountain range. Through our psychic link, I helped the entity withdraw its consciousness from the surface thermal blooms, pulling its awareness down through layers of rock and ice toward the deep chambers it had selected. The thermal readings began dropping immediately. Steam vents sealed themselves as the creature's influence retreated underground. The fires consuming park buildings extinguished as their supernatural fuel source was redirected toward the hibernation process. Sleep will be deeper now, the entity communicated, as our connection began to fade. When I wake again, the world will be different once more. Perhaps by then, the small, quick things will have learned wisdom. The final withdrawal felt like a tide receding, leaving behind calm water and clear skies. My enhanced perception contracted back to normal human awareness, leaving me exhausted but strangely peaceful. Clean disengagement, Chief Marlowe reported into his radio. Thermal activity returning to baseline. Entity has returned to dormancy voluntarily. As dawn broke over Glacier National Park, the evacuation orders were lifted and the specialized equipment was packed away. The crisis that could have reshaped northwestern Montana had been resolved through communication rather than force. Not bad for your first negotiation with a geological entity, Tommy said, helping me to my feet. Not something they cover in firefighter training, I replied, watching the mountains stand peaceful and ordinary once again in the morning light. I'm writing this in Chief Marlowe's office at 2 a.m., reading through the original 7 protocols by lamplight, the same coffee-stained paper that saved my life a dozen times over. The handwriting hasn't changed. Still Chief Marlowe's grandfather's careful cursive, Tommy's father's additions in different ink, decades of wisdom accumulated one supernatural encounter at a time. The desk drawer holds my EMT certification from Portland, but it feels like a relic from someone else's life now. That Jake Bear Grease who fled Oregon after losing a child on Southeast Powell wouldn't recognize the man who can communicate with entities that measure time in geological epochs. Red appears in the doorway, carrying 2 fresh cups of coffee and a manila folder marked with symbols that indicate supernatural personnel files. New recruit starts next week, she says, settling into the chair across from the desk. Alex Crowfeather, fresh from the fire academy in Missoula. Tommy's cousin. Think she'll handle it better than I did? I ask, remembering my first reaction to the protocols. Tommy says she grew up hearing stories about the old ways, about fires that burn more than wood. Might not need as much convincing. Red opens the folder, revealing a photograph of a young woman with intelligent eyes and the kind of steady expression that suggests she's already seen things that can't be explained in textbooks. Through the window, I can see Highway 93 stretching north toward Canada, where other departments handle their own supernatural incidents according to their own ancient wisdom. The network Captain Rodriguez mentioned during the Glacier Park event, firefighters across the northern Rockies who've learned that some blazes require more than water and foam. You ever think about going back? Red asks, gesturing toward my Portland certification. I consider the question while studying the protocols, the 7 rules that transformed a burned-out EMT into someone who could negotiate with creatures older than human civilization. Portland doesn't need what I've become, but this valley does. My radio crackles with a familiar voice. Engine 12, this is Captain Walsh. All quiet in the valley tonight. Entities secure, containments holding strong. Rest easy, Jake. I key the microphone briefly, acknowledgement without direct conversation. Following Protocol 3, even in casual contact with the dead. After months of hearing Walsh's warnings and guidance, his presence has become as familiar as my own heartbeat. The memorial wall in the hallway holds photographs of everyone we've lost. The 35 people from Raven's Hollow, the Mackenzie family trapped in their burning loop, even the 5 maintenance workers who finally found peace after decades of digging. The official records list them as accident victims, but in this station, truth matters more than comfortable fiction. Tomorrow, I'll meet Alex Crowfeather and watch her face when Chief Marlowe hands her the protocols. I'll remember my own skepticism, the gradual acceptance that came with each supernatural encounter. The moment I realized that fighting fires in Montana meant protecting the living from forces older than recorded history. The mountains outside stand patient and watchful, keeping their secrets, while the aurora borealis paints the northern sky in colors that remind me of flames that burn without consuming. Somewhere in the deep chambers below Glacier Park, an ancient entity sleeps peacefully, trusting us to guide its dreams. In the morning, there will be ordinary calls: kitchen fires, chimney maintenance, teenagers burning homework behind the school. But there will also be the other kind, the ones that require protocols written in fading ink by firefighters who understood that some blazes burn deeper than wood and flesh. I fold the protocol paper carefully and lock it in the desk drawer, then head home through empty streets lined with houses where normal people sleep safely. They're protected by rules they'll never read, watched over by people they'll never thank, defended against threats they'll never believe exist. Danny would have laughed at the idea of his partner becoming a guardian against supernatural fires. But Danny never saw what happens when ancient things wake up hungry, never felt the weight of protecting an entire valley from forces beyond human understanding. The work found me when I needed it most. Now I make sure it finds others who need it too.